Oh, don't worry about me. I'm only here to decide whether to ban your art or merely deny you funding. Be on your merry way. We'll be in touch. You can be sure of it.
Funding shapes a lot what happens in the end.
I think that the key word for surviving, at least in civil sector in Serbia, was solidarity.
When funding gets cut, it just creates a different sort of practice that responds to that, and maybe a more radical activist one that comes from a very different place.
Hello and welcome to Standard Time, our talk show exploring a wide array of European matters and why Europe matters. I'm your host, Rika Kingapap. On Display Europe, you can watch this show or listen to it in a podcast format. Money likes to go where money already resides. This truism is valid in the cultural sector as well, which has seen a lot of its funding opportunities disappear in the past few years, arguably since 2008. And as funding disappears from the field, so do a lot of people lose their opportunity to participate, either as audience members or as cultural practitioners, or both. You may say, who cares? Why should we even pay for culture? But I say, it really does matter. It matters who gets to participate and what is on offer. Cultural work is indeed labor, and for it to thrive, it must be treated as such. Working in culture may be a beautiful vocation, but I haven't yet managed to pay my rent in metaphors. Arts, publishing, heck, even academia are being increasingly reserved for those who can afford to not have to make a living from their work. I find it particularly bitter that now, when ethnic, sexual and social minorities and women have started to get leading roles in our conventionally white, cishet, male-dominated fields, money practically disappears from this area, leaving a diverse, competent and dedicated cohort of the intelligentsia to wipe their tears with their project papers and dishes with their PhD certificates. Meaning-making had long been the pastime of the leisurely classes, and with funding disappearing from the field, we are headed in this direction once again. For instance, Slovakia's culture chief Marta Šimičková promotes the idea that culture should be Slovak and no other. For her, this means the exclusion, of course, of LGBTQIA+ organizations, an all-out attack on independent arts and media, deposing directors of emblematic art institutions because of their political views, a classic case of culture wars. This attack is far from unprecedented, even in Slovakia's immediate region. Hungary and Serbia have obliterated funding for independent culture and weaponized funding against dissent in arts and media for over a decade. Poland had a right-wing government who attempted something in a similar vein until they were deposed in 2023, and there are strong contenders all around Europe who dream of a chance at such a takeover. Conservatives and the far right seem to have recognized that culture is where worldviews are formed, and they are doing their worst to restrict what actually reaches people. But independent culture does fight back. In Slovakia, for instance, a nationwide initiative started to organize the cultural community under the umbrella of open culture. It's brought together 400 institutions and almost 2,000 artists across the country and gathered 10,000 people for a public protest in Bratislava last year. Fighting against the political pressure on culture is crucial, especially since the long-standing methods of evading such funding cuts have become more difficult now that formerly influential funding partners, such as USAID, are no longer reliable partners, having slashed more than 80% of its projects. The chainsaw of bureaucracy.
Chainsaw!
Oh my world, this frigging guy! USAID was set up in the 1960s to manage humanitarian aid programs and all sorts of cultural funding on behalf of the US government and has a base in more than 60 countries. Since the 60s, it has been a lifeline across many fields, ranging from healthcare to publishing to advocacy and human rights organizations to education. It had provided not only millions of people with essential services, but also a lot of soft power to the US, which the Trump administration neither seems to understand nor care about. The influence of these rash cuts is so great that, according to the WHO, since the funding was cut, Afghanistan is drifting into an escalating humanitarian crisis with outbreaks of diseases such as measles, malaria, and polio. as reported by The Guardian. Olena Leptucha, the head of the Kharkiv Crisis Info Center in Ukraine, says that especially for local or hyper-local media, the suspension of US aid funding will cause an information desert. The Info Center was founded after Russia invaded Crimea in 2014 and is, amongst others, an editorial office that produces news and multimedia to regions that would be otherwise incredibly difficult to reach. Olena Leptucha notes that the withdrawal is an attack on freedom of speech and warns that people exhausted by the war will receive less information and it will be easier to manipulate them. Many colleagues of mine who are working in the cultural sector around the world have already lost their livelihoods or are at the risk of losing theirs and cannot provide essential services and cultural access to millions of people they had served before. US aid funding cuts have revealed how heavily news outlets, humanitarian aid, and culture programs are dependent on foreign help, which also makes them very vulnerable. So, how can we strengthen cultural institutions and why is it so difficult to get state support? We have invited 4 guests to talk about the subject. György Szabó has worked for decades as a cultural manager in the field of performing arts. One of his main aims was to promote the recognition of contemporary performing arts among a wide section of society. He was the founder of Workshop Foundation and Trafó House in Budapest. Maximilian Lehner is the brand new managing director of EUROZINE. He's a curator, a critic with a background in philosophy, and he is also a practicing cultural manager. Maria Popovic prefers the name Zmaja. She is the program director at Magnet Association and manages several Creative Europe projects through the Student Cultural Center in Novi Sad and the foundation Exit. Since 2000, she has worked as a project manager, trainer, evaluator, and consultant for various EU programs, also teaching and assessing for multiple national agencies and the European Commission. Tarun Kade is a dramaturge at Wiener Festwochen, previously active at Thalia Theater, Theater Bremen, and Münchner Kammerspiele. He co-founded modesofoperation.com and works closely with directors like Toshiki Okada and Leonie Bö. Today we are hosted by the Library of the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. A big thank you to them. Let's get to this. Hello, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me about how money disappears from culture. What a lovely topic, isn't it? I want to start by asking you, György, about your work, because you've been working in contemporary performing arts for decades in Hungary.
First of all, I want to mention I'm economist. So it means I have different perspectives. So I'm not coming from the aesthetical world. It's much more a person who were influenced by the revolution of performing art, which was dominating in the 80s. I can see 4 decades, and it's very interesting to see that the first one, when I recognized it, and the people were very enthusiastic, mostly the students, because this was contemporary performing art was dominating mostly at the university clubs. In the 90s, when the political changes arrived, and in the 90s, this new aesthetics became very interesting for the big public. At that time it was called alternative culture, but which was very important, the international collaboration in this new era, because we were behind the Iron Curtain, and the cultural institutes of other countries, they were very active and participated to have this kind of movement. The most important things at that time was to have a background, a physical background. So I found a building, and we created a venue which is called Trafó. But I guess which is the most important thing is how to finance this kind of movements of the young people. In the 90s, that was very typical. It was financed, many things were financed by the Foreign Institute, by the international links, connections, and so on. But the next step was for me to institutionalize this. It meant that to go into the funding, the national funding, It succeeded. It means we had a budget, first time in my life, to have a real budget, but very small budget. In 2000, so the scene was flourishing until 2004. The 2004 was a very essential moment in the Hungarian history because we joined to EU. And after the unification, the Foreign Culture Institute stopped running in Hungary. But as far as I know, it happened in our region, who joined to EU, because I guess there was a certain belief that on the national level, the governments will fill up this kind of gap. We missed it. Fidesz came and it immediately killed out this new resources, and because no fund, almost it's a zero. And the small institutions, including Trafó, they have been struggling for many years how to maintain themselves. Though Trafó, it's an easier situation because it belongs to the city council. But the city is also under attack of the government. So it's so they don't have resources, too much resources to help out this independent scene. And we have to start over. We need a new financial plan for the future and to start over with the funding. And we have to step up with a new plan, how to finance this independent scene, because independent scene, if we try to look from the perspective of theater, I would say that this is the innovative part of the theater world.
I often get the question, because my theater at S02E25 Színház has also been always teetering on the precipice, and people are working as volunteers for no money, including the founder Kati Laban for years now. It's like, yeah, but it's just you're fun. Like, why do you always need money? People used to do this as volunteers in the 70s. First of all, in the 70s, attainable living standards were elsewhere. And second of all, if no funding is included, then everybody who cannot afford to volunteer will be excluded from the cultural scene.
Which is very important. The living standards were different in the 80s and the 90s. The economy was not so developed, but after 2000, when we have this globalization, as we say that, so it means we lost our time, we lost our freedom because the market, the economy jumped on it, and every segment many of them were not really occupied by the economy. So I guess that's why it's very important to think over what is the subsidy, because the subsidy should provide that kind of situation to work against the economy demands. You have to make yourself free to make your research, you make your investigation, or dare to be against the mainstream.
Joining the EU, and I've seen this also in NGO financing in a lot of other places, people were thinking, okay, it's a done deal, democracy has materialized and everything is going to be just fine in these countries who have joined the EU by now. And of course, that's not the trajectory we have gone, and it's not just because of the 2008 economic crisis, which has been spiraling in different iterations ever since. Then I think about, for instance, Serbia, who do get access to some EU funding but not an EU member, experience quite a lot of very open political repression. And Zmaja, you are very used to cooking from what you have, which is oftentimes very little.
I'm also an economist, which is very interesting, and I'm also very much into performing arts. This is and I've also heard about some other cases, so it seems it's a kind of a good combination that we are able to translate and listen, that we have a listening ear for artists, how to translate it into what I say commissions language. The NGO sector needed to do a lot of groundwork. And since we are also, as you said, used to not having any public money, we really learned how to fundraise. And the key was that we really never had governmental aid or any operational grants. So we really needed to be very crafty and to rely on different international grants. So the pressure on the EU funds is just going to grow. you know. And for instance, even though we are a public institution under the Ministry of Education, last year we didn't get, and we ran, for instance, 3 Creative Europe projects, one as lead, mid-scale. We are a member of a platform, and we are also co-managing one mid-scale of a million. We got €0 for matching grants. Even though the ministry signed that kind of by autism, they must give you up to 30%. The moment you have a contract with the commission for the matching grants, they must give you. So we are being penalized for being good as a public institution. So you can imagine how it is for independent cultural scene who doesn't have at all an option to apply. But people are used to people are very creative, also with finances. As you know, dancers, for instance, they do it for fun. They don't need salaries. No, I'm joking. Everybody has a day job. Majority of artists work either in public schools or, for instance, in the contemporary dance, their majority of them is in the ballet school or somewhere else, having day jobs. And then the productions are done with very symbolic amounts and so on. And I think that the key word for surviving, at least in civil sector in Serbia, was solidarity. And also being crafty and knowing how to fundraise and have a good team. So this was crucial. So this combination of economists and artists and PRs and people who are good in cultural diplomacy.
Well, let's talk about state funding and a case with Wiener Festwochen and you, Tarun, your work that is funded by the state and Austrian cultural funding provided by the state and provided by the municipalities is one of the most stable ones across Europe, and I would say globally speaking, to be honest.
Yeah, in that sense, really, as you said, it's a different system, but also it's kind of anti-cyclical in the way it's operated, because in the last years it was in the city of Vienna going in direction of 50%, that the cultural funding was heightened, where everywhere also in the German-speaking world, like Berlin most recently, or also richer places like Munich, the cultural funding was cut now in kind of aftermath of Corona and war and everything. So in a sense, this is of course a super privileged position, and is also beautiful that the municipality and Austrian government also sees this need. And in terms of rock solid, if it's going to stay rock solid, yeah, I mean, it depends, of course, on things like elections and who is going to be in power. Everyone was very afraid, of course, on the level of the state, if the kind of the coalition had formed between FPÖ and ÖVP, how it would have continued in that sector. And even, I mean, one thing is numbers, like how much money is given to culture in general, but then it's also culture is a wide field, like what kind of culture is funded. And in that sense, of course, we're very happy that at the moment Wiener Festwochen, with the artistic direction of Milo Rau and a kind of a very strong also activist approach and political approach, also in terms of the words that you mentioned of solidarity and founding like on a European solidarity level, a new platform called Resistance Now, where kind of a lot of actors from also fields or countries where culture is much more under attack, really, can create like a power together in terms of solidarity. And of course, Wiener Festwochen has a specific function in that, and also responsibility in that sense, in both giving sort of visibility, but also in terms of co-producing specific projects and making actual money flow.
We make the argument for the economic power of culture to persuade decision makers, but first of all, monetizing and quantifying the exact impact of culture is, well, a tedious process and a very subjective one. And second of all, as you also point out, oftentimes it might not just be the amount of money that it brings in, because then it sends culture down a very weird pathway. But Vienna, at least in my understanding, also decided to amp up cultural funding because there is an understanding that this is who we are.
In a sense, Wiener Festwochen is going to be 75 years old in 2026, and it's part of a Avignon Festival, of a group of festivals that were kind of created after the war from a specific kind of an European idea, and also with this kind of wish to have a sort of international, create a sort of international dialogue and network. This is Festwochen, and also in the cultural field of Vienna, is there to do a kind of the extraordinary, in a sense, not only to bring like the most glamour, that too, but also I think to challenge or kind of question specific kinds of thinking. I have been working before I came to Festwochen in St. Pölten in Lower Austria, and I think there this kind of first way of thinking about culture also was very present in thinking of like how much money is kind of raised, is flowing back into the Lower Austrian market, in a sense, from this very I don't know, simple way of thinking economically or of the use of culture. And I think Vienna in that way is still, I mean, I don't want to over-glorify Vienna, but in that sense is still kind of an exception.
Max, let's talk about a bit more of an independent path. You have your own artistic practice, but you have been fundraising for and running projects for smaller cultural institutions for quite some time. You've been around the block and also in quite a couple of countries. Funding is going away from the cultural sector, at least in much of Europe.
I had the experience that it makes people more creative in how to make these projects happen. And especially I noticed this when I moved from Germany back to Austria, because I was never working in the art field in Austria before. And I realized that in Austria there is like a lot of independent spaces funded and a lot of artists making their money through running these spaces. So it's kind of a side economy that all artists, or a lot of them, are subsidized by running art spaces, which actually creates more work for them. But then in the end, they at least have like a basic income, so to say, through running this art space. It creates a different artistic practice because the money comes from some sort of stable, continuous income. So you have a different time for creating artworks. Whilst when you look at the German situation, where there is a lot of individual project funding, also project funding from private foundations that just want one thing to happen. And it creates a very different approach, because if you have to do something like one specific thing, you create something different than if you have a continuous base and you shape your artistic practice as an ongoing one. So I think also funding shapes a lot what happens in the end, and I think that's that's kind of why I have a hard time to answer this, because I think like when funding get cut, it just creates a different sort of practice that responds to that, and maybe a more radical activist one that comes from a very different place.
A huge thank you to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna for hosting us. It's not only one of the most prestigious and storied art academies in Europe, but also impressively forward-thinking and innovative. We're honored to be filming this episode in a place where tradition meets bold creativity. And if you want to know a bit more about their work, you can listen or watch the episode we have on cancel culture, which features their director. Link in the show notes. Now back to the discussion.
In my experience, much of operational funding, or what we would call paying the bills and allowing you to maintain what you do and keep doing what you're doing as you see fit, much of that has disappeared, and a lot of available sort of cultural funds, especially with private funders, but also EU funding, is very strongly branded for project.
It creates this gap between, like what we heard before, like this idea of innovation that is so important because it's kind of how we think, at least in Europe, from European philosophy about arts, that it has to be something that is new and always new. So this has to be the project goal, to create something new.
Innovative about your project of maintaining an office for your people to work in. It's
Exactly,
like, well,
and this creates the kind of friction with what actually is needed also for a continuous artistic practice, namely that there has to be a continuity in funding, that there has to be a continuity in the people you work with, that there has to be a continuity in the place you can work at, and all this is not considered in how a lot of funding programs are shaped, because they only think to dig off the innovation that is on top of it and want to present it as theirs. How do you do those funding applications for something that just continues your practice?
On a more practical level, what is it your office actually does then for the artist? Do you write the applications? Do you make the budgets? Or what is it? What is specifically the practical work that you do?
Everything. So it's like from meeting with the artists when they have ideas that they want to bring into practice. We start with working on their concepts, working on how this can come to how this can become a public project, and then do the funding applications and the whole project management.
If we take out the EU grants, what will be left? So I guess that the most important thing is mostly in East Europe, because we were depending on the West. So what we can build locally, because we know each other much better than France and so on. So we have the same history. Many times we were occupied with the same guys, same nations, and so we understand much more than the West, the East. So for the future, I guess we have to work much more regionally, much more locally, to build structures, institutionalization. That's very important, because that gives a stability.
We are back really to socialism, to self-governance, samoupravljanje, as we said before. So my friend and I, we bought a house as natural persons. She sold her apartment, I took a loan, we really invested our own money. In the association, we have experts that we give backup and administration and freedom to work on projects that they love, and we love, and with passion and drive comes quality. And as a sustainability plan, we are renting the house to the civil society for trainings, for seminars, for these kind of things. So this is how we manage to have this balance, but still all the activities that we host are need to match our values. So we were actually frightened, because it's two of us, physically and financially, and with our own names. And my name is on the loan, on one hand. On the other hand, we were very touched with the support that we got from all these people who are really like experts in different fields. Everybody found its own place there, and we really work as a cooperative. For us, it was important that these people feel at home, so that they have a freedom to create projects and programs that they think can change the community. And we really try to work very closely with this tiny mini community. My dream is to do the strategic things for the association and to run one project. And my wish for Magnet is to have 30 projects a year.
You may love it, but if you have to make a living from something else, many of us who don't have a financial background to fall back on or support a family or something, we're just not going to do it because we don't have that kind of free time.
But this is really what we wanted to do. For us, for me, it was a retirement plan. I really want to live out of rent and to run one project a year. You know, one that I really love.
That
and that
sounds
other
nice.
people are free to, that they know that they have kind of a safe house, you know, which they will get support or extremely low prices for.
You not only house projects, you also house protesting students right now. There's huge political upheaval going on in Serbia. So many of us are so extremely proud of you guys and very excited for you. But this is a risky business for a cultural institution. So why do you house these students? What kind of risks does that pose to you? Or are you just like shrugging this off as tomorrow's problem?
We have we are an independent institution and we have no connection to university. So we are not obliged to host them. But we have very close ties to all the faculties of arts and so on, technical sciences and so on. And we were occupied by students 6 years ago when we had a big project about cultural participation of young people. And this theater festival was the first time ever, at least that I know, in public institutions in Serbia for co-curating and co-programming with young people. So majority of these young people that work with us on this festival for 6 years are now leading the protests. Anyway, the doors are open for them. They're very, very nice. They, and they bring also the programs, and we are working with no interruption except of the programs.
Tarun, you also mentioned that the Festwochen take their mandate seriously, that they support artists, cultural practitioners who are in a tougher spot than you guys here are.
In August 24, the director of the Slovakian National Theater, Matej Drilička, he was fired because of political reasons, and from that Milo Rau and Matej together founded an initiative called the Resistance Now. Maybe also the love or this strong desire to to realize what you want in your life. Maybe if you do art, you kind of become vulnerable in a sense for being exploited also on a money level, but also on a sexual level. And you go into the row zero of Rammstein because you kind of have the feeling there is something that can be, there is a chance or there's an opportunity in that. So kind of on these different levels of love, on the one side of creating a power to create new ways of being together, working together, living together, but on the other side, on the level of love, being also something that makes you vulnerable for exploitation. This is going to be what the Festwochen will circle around in this edition.
I think it has a lot to do, like this idea of being dependent on some sort of, and be it funding or be it like a figure that you relate to, and that's why I would come back to funding as a topic also, because in that sense, also all those kinds of project funding, state funding opportunities they make us as the ones who take them also very dependent on what those institutions expect from us. Yeah. And I think there's like it's not, I would not say a similarity to what you said, but it's this strong tie to what defines what we can do, and also what then shapes what we love. And I think this is something that we might consider a lot for funding and for how to work with people, like how to create those spaces that actually leave open the space for something to be done differently. And I think this is not done through asking for something new or some innovation in a project, but it's rather done by actually keeping the space open. And this also is it's not something I come up with, but it's like a very old idea actually from analyzing how the alternative scene in New York from the 60s on emerged and became so important. It was because the mostly minimal artists, they occupied places where they saw where their art fits in. And now they're all super rich and sold very expensive, but this also shows that there was that in occupying something that is still void and that is not shaped yet. And I think thinking about this also in terms of how we can think about money now, and I think for that your project is really amazing. And I heard also of other privately funded places that actually try to leave open space for artists to work there. And I think a lot of now very wealthy organizations try the same, but they try it with blue chip artists, so it's not that interesting.
And you mentioned this really comes oftentimes with private funding and mecenatura.
Which is really surprising, because I only hear it from private foundations that they keep this real openness, and rarely from state funding, even though state funding is much more open usually. But then everyone wants to fit in, I think, and maybe it's self-restriction also.
In my experience, state funders, including the European Commission, what they hate most in life is paying people for work, right? Especially in terms of EU funding, it's cubic meters of reinforced concrete is what they are thinking about, right? That's what they're shaped for. But they are not meant to provide our full cultural funding. The problem is that certain layers of opportunities, including a cheap house that you can get for free to use from the municipality, all these kinds of things that used to be available, for instance, in the 90s, have gone away with this huge investment and development drive where every square inch is monetized in a way, and you always have to prove that you are here for monetary value. Another thing I see with private funders that gives me the heebie-jeebies is when they really want to get involved. And we want to be part of your projects. It's it's very nice of you guys, but you work in the communications department. Don't talk into my project. This is oftentimes a mistake where we applaud our funders. We thank them very dearly for their sensitivity and their interest in our work, and then they think that we mean this.
In my past, in the late 80s and 90s, the firms, the companies were important and they really gave some money out. But after 2000, somehow, these amounts were not so significant. So I guess what we can do locally is to build a strategy on the local conditions. As far as I feel that in Hungary, we have to really speculate on public money and to use the public money as much as possible to give maneuvering space and freedom to the artist. How you do that? How can you involve the local municipality, the civil organization, the civil society, the state, and so on and so on? It's really up to you and up to the community. I guess we never talk about, in the past 35 years, since I'm in an international networks, which is very strange for me, we never talked about quality. because we are trying to be very good managers. We manage many things. There is somebody who is really gifted and recognized, we lose them because they go to the West. And it means we have less chance to build something locally. So these are the main questions for me. So I wouldn't say that this or this is the let's say, the right way. I guess we have to watch everything in a complexity and use whatever you can and build a community. And very often what I can see, there's one or a couple of people who wants to dominate all the time. I would say that we need to think a community, which means many, many people are there, artists, all kinds of people, and they work together. And there's a solidarity in that case, what Maya said.
I hope to see you guys, and not just in project applications, very soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to know what you think. Who should pay for the arts? Should anybody pay for their art? Leave us a comment down below, and while you're already rummaging down there, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. This show is powered by Display Europe, a platform for multilingual content on European politics and culture. This project is co-funded by the EU and the European Cultural Foundation. Importantly, the views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and the authors only. They do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the EACA can be held responsible for them. Not that we would mind them taking advice from us.